This is a tutorial on the 2025 Residential Purchase Agreement, California edition. There are other state editions that are being worked on. This one is specifically for California, and it starts with the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship because this is required in the state of California. So we have this here on page 1. The buyer is going to sign. You, as the agent, are going to sign. You put your information. You do nothing on page 2. And then we arrive at the actual purchase agreement. Now, keep in mind that this purchase agreement must be presented to the seller by their agent. If you write up an offer on this form and give it to the representative of the seller, their fiduciary, they're obligated to present it unless they have written instructions from the seller stating that they do not want offers presented. Unless they have written instructions, they must present it. And if they don't, if a day or two goes by and there's no communication from the listing agent, well, you can contact the seller directly. So let's start with this purchase agreement. We put in the date that we're preparing it here. This is the date you're drafting it. The name of the buyer, or buyers, plural, if there's more than one. Property street address, the city, the state, the zip code, the county, assessor's parcel number, which is effectively the tax ID for real estate. And that can be found on the MLS, on property tax records. It can be found from the seller. You can ask the listing agent. And if you really can't find it, just leave it blank for now. Purchase price shall be, we write it in numerically here, and then we write it in a text value. And it's redundant for the reason of preventing any miscommunication. You don't want a typo or something to throw this off. So that's why it's written twice in two different ways. Close of escrow, you can write in a calendar date here, definitive closing date, or check this box and write in 30, which is fairly customary. Representation. Now, presuming the seller has an agent, you'll write in the name of the agent's brokerage here, listing agent there, your brokerage name, and your name as the buyer's representative. Of course, if let's say it's a for sale by owner or there's not an agent involved on both sides, you can write NA or draw a line through it or leave it blank. Doesn't matter. Finance terms. Earnest money deposit or initial deposit of 1 to 3% of the sales price. That's what's customary. We're just writing in $10,000, 1% of this sales price, okay? And then if it was a cash offer, we'd check this box, but it's not. We're pretending that this is an 80-20 scenario, 20% down payment, 80% conventional loan. So that's why I wrote $800,000. That's the loan amount. This is a conventional loan because the buyer is going to put 20% down, which is $200,000. Now, if this were an FHA or VA scenario, you check this box, the respective box, but it's not. We're good. We're leaving it by default conventional. And then, of course, there's these other boxes if there's some other creative financing measure in place. Now, remainder down payment, and it tells you here, it's the total down payment minus the earnest money deposit. $200,000 minus the $10,000, and we put $190 there. All these numbers here should add up to the purchase price. It's that simple. You can just add up these numbers, and it should equal the purchase price. Same number as here, and balance out. That's how you can double check your math. Now, commission. Going forward, commission is addressed on real estate purchase agreements for the most part. I think that's a new standard looking ahead. So we have here boxes you can check. If you want the seller to pay the broker representing the buyer, you check this box, or the seller's broker, or the buyer, and then you put in the amount. In this case, we have 2.5% of the sales price, or you can write in a flat fee and something else. And if there are additional terms you need to state that haven't been explicitly mentioned, go ahead and write them here. Both parties initial, and we move on. And this is more auxiliary space. If this isn't enough for additional terms, you can just write it in here. Proof of funds, by default, delivered within 3 days. Same with lender verification, pre-approval letter. You don't need to do anything here. Just leave it as it is. Now, I highly recommend seller checks or seller pays. So you check this box, seller shall pay for smoke detector installation, carbon monoxide detector, water heater bracing. Why? Well, is the buyer going to go into the seller's house and start doing work? And what if it falls out of escrow? That's why this should be the seller's responsibility. Seller to pay natural hazard disclosure. Check the box environmental. Go ahead and write fastnhd.com. And is there another report that the seller is going to pay for? Is there a termite inspection performed by whom? Well, you can write buyer's choice, seller's choice. Okay. I think the final version of this form says wood destroying pest, which is the more formal term, because really termite inspections aren't just termites. It's also fungus or any sort of organism that can cause the decay of wood. All right. And then seller shall pay for the following. Is there something we haven't talked about that the seller should pay or the buyer should pay? Well, check the respective box, write it in. You have plenty of space to add whatever you want. Who's paying for owner's title insurance? Well, go ahead and just write that in. Okay. Now, I know in California, Southern California is done a little differently. Generally speaking, in Southern California, the seller pays for the owner's title policy. In Northern California, it varies county to county, and even it's different in certain counties. So what we're going to do is the Southern California version, because it's more uniform, and say the seller's going to pay. But of course, you can check these boxes and do whatever's customary for your area. We write in seller's choice. That's how they do it in Southern California for the most part. We check both these boxes for escrow. Each pay their own. Escrow company should be seller's choice. Of course, if it's the same company, escrow and title, as it often is in Northern California, check that box. And now who's paying what here? Seller shall pay the county transfer tax, city transfer tax, if applicable. Many cities don't have that. And then HOA, if there's an HOA involved, who's paying for the cost of the HOA docs and then the HOA transfer or certification. Home warranty. Seller typically pays. We put in a number here. You can find a number on a home warranty company's website and then issued by seller's choice. I think actually buyer's choice is better. Why? The buyer is the one that has to call the 1-800 number and deal with it if something goes wrong. So let the buyer choose so that they can't blame the seller in the future and say the seller chose some lousy company that does a poor job. No, instead, the buyer can only blame themselves because they've chosen the home warranty company. Does someone need to pay something that hasn't been mentioned? Go ahead and check that box and write it in here. All right. Now, real property, generally speaking, is everything that's affixed to the premises. And there's a list here, okay? Now, what typically conveys, we check these boxes: washing machine, laundry dryer, refrigerator, stove. Do you want television wall mounts? Check that box. Do you want to include the TV? Are there personal items that you also want included? Because the garden gnome is personal property. That's not real property. It's not affixed, okay? So you can write in garden gnome if you want. All right, contingencies. By default, 17-day loan contingency. You don't want it? Maybe you're a cash buyer, no loan contingency. You want to change how many days? Write it in right there. All right, and then down here, appraisal contingency. Cash buyers don't need this. Everyone else does. You want to change how much time you have? You want to reduce it to 10? Write it in right there. No inspection contingency. Some hardcore investors might waive it. I highly discourage ever doing that. Seller disclosure period, by default, 7 days. You don't have to do anything here. You can modify it. You don't have to do anything. This is all boilerplate verbiage. Liquidated damages. Both parties should initial here. This is a requirement, and this ties in a state law in California about what happens to a deposit and the max of the deposit that can be retained by the seller if the buyer breaches. But this just pertains to the earnest money deposit. And basically, if all contingencies have been removed and the buyer breaches, well, they lose their deposit. All right. And then by default, you can leave it all alone. Primary residence, only check this box if you want to modify something. Both parties initial, we move on. Mediation is the first course of dispute resolution. And if that doesn't work, the parties can elect to have arbitration as the next remedy. And they have to initial here. They have to elect arbitration. If not, it goes mediation and then it goes to court. So this is advisable as well. All right. And this is more just advisory information, disclaimers, and so on. You can read it and skim for yourself. I mean, there's so much that is required to be disclosed in the state of California. All right. More of that. Additional terms. Anything else that wasn't mentioned that you want to add, put it in here. Okay, expiration. This expires 6 p.m. on the third day by default, or shorten or lengthen the expiration here. Buyer signs. This offer is actually, no, it's not ready to go because you as the agent, you have to sign down here. But let's go back. Buyer signs and their part's done. If the seller accepts, they sign and they check this box if they counter, okay? And this is where the agents are going to sign, and then finally the escrow holder, and then both parties initial at the bottom. And that's it. 9 pages plus that agency disclosure. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. If you are looking for this for another state, leave a comment and I'll do a tutorial on that state form. Thank you for watching.